my recorder.
I'm going to get the postings up before we start.
Okay, you do that, and I'll get this thing ready. You get the postings. Linda, welcome back. Good to have you with us. And as soon as you get those done, Trish, then you can spotlight my screen. Or actually, I guess since we figured out I can do it, I can do it myself, huh?
Yeah.
Going to spotlight my screen for all of you for a minute. So, before we get into our 4-step workshop, and welcome to everyone, those of you who are returning and those of you who are here for the first time. We love what we do in this workshop, and everything that we do in it is right out of the big book. And it's a presentation of the way that the 4 steps should look and it should go. But what do we get to Alcoholics Anonymous with? What do we drag in besides the fact we can't stop drinking? A whole bunch of emotional baggage. So I brought my emotional baggage for you tonight for a little demonstration of why we do a 4th step. Because in the book it tells us that our liquor was but a symptom, and we had to get down to causes and conditions. So in this little bag, I've got a lifetime of causes and conditions and reasons that I have drank. And hang on, let me see if I can adjust my light here in the room a little bit. There we go, that's a little better. So I've been carrying around a lifetime of emotional baggage. And it started out when I was a little kid with mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and all those people who get onto you because you're a 3-year-old and you're not acting like an adult and doing adult things. Somehow after we become adults, we forget what it's like to be a child. So, that's when the emotional baggage starts. And then we start getting into relationships, and we start getting into romantic relationships and so on. And things don't go well in it, and we end up hurt, and we get out of that relationship, and we move into another relationship, and we're still carrying all of the baggage of the past relationships, and we never give ourselves time to hear. And one of the analogies that I always like to use is, AA boy meets AA girl on AA campus, and there's a couple of newcomers, and step 1, my life is unmanageable, and step 12, I'm fixing to share it with you. And that's the definition I use for 13-stepping. And there's no program mixed in with it. And so one day we decide we're going to cohabitate with one another, and I knock on the door, and you answer, and I say, "Hi, I'm here, and I got my baggage," and I slip it under the bed or put it on the shelf, and everything's going fine and wonderful in the relationship until you do something that reminds me of her. Now, her might have been my last relationship, could have been 5 relationships ago, and even though you're not her, you just have this thing that you do that reminds me of her, and all of a sudden I pull out the emotional baggage and I start opening it up, and I start re-feeling all of those old feelings one more time. So I've got a few things here, and here again, I've been dragging this stuff around for years. So I've got the picture that my first girlfriend gave me that I just can't get rid of because I like the picture, but I really, really liked my first girlfriend, and I never had a pathway to get over her. And then the picture of the one that got away, and I just can't let go of that, and she's just forever etched in my mind. Of course, this one is because she was my 3rd wife who passed away a few years ago. But still, I can't. My point is I'm not letting go of the emotional baggage and the hurts and pains that go along the journey, and everything's going along in life. And then, as in my experience, Most relationships didn't start because you're an absolute genius and a rocket scientist. Somehow there was some sort of physical attraction in that relationship, which were, I saw you on the dance floor, or that long, pretty blonde hair, whatever it was. There's generally some sort of physical attraction, it seems like, before we get the mental attraction. So, the relationship's going good. Maybe we're making a little whoopee, and that's good. And all of a sudden, one day, things start happening. Now, this thing of emotional baggage really isn't about me or about them. It's about me and my behaviors in life. So things aren't so good, and the bedroom has gotten rather quiet, and we don't get together too much anymore. So what do? I slip down to the local liquor store and I buy myself a few inappropriate magazines. Now the problem with that, and I don't even realize it, I think it's just harmless, but she finds out, and all of a sudden her feelings are hurt because she's not good enough. But emotionally, in my mind, I'm already cheating. I'm already stepping out on her because I'm looking at other women. And we keep going through this, and then we come into the age of technology and cell phones, and all of a sudden maybe I meet somebody and I develop this online relationship or this texting relationship with them, and things get a little out of control and out of hand. And this emotional baggage just keeps building up. And then things are getting a little nastier in our relationship. We're fighting and we're arguing a whole lot more. And one day, it hasn't escalated into violence or anything, but one day I get so angry at you that I pick up your favorite statue from across the room and I hurl it across the room, and this poor little guy got his head broken off. So I did that in order to hurt you, to cause you some emotional pain out of my anger. And none of this stuff is healthy in a relationship. So as we go along, then we introduce the idea of the elephant in the room, which is my alcoholism, my anger, my behavior, and the things that I'm doing. And you say all of this stuff to me, and I immediately go into denial and accusations and accusing you of doing things. And it's just extremely, extremely unhealthy. And what I find is the whole world, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, ever since I was a child, every relationship I've ever been in has tried to put me into a box. By the time I get to Alcoholics Anonymous, my box is full of stuff. Today it's empty as a result of doing the healing that step 4 introduces me to. So I've gone through all of this stuff in life. And by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, my favorite t-shirt, I wear it often. It's the t-shirt with the hole in the sole. And I'm just absolutely broken and shattered inside. Now I have a tendency to wear this t-shirt this way today because my whole brain is all wrapped around it. And then, because of depression, because alcohol is a depressant and so on, and because I live in so much fear, when all of my natural resources and instincts are failing me, I go to the old smelly blanket and I wrap it around myself, and it's the place where I'm safe and I'm warm, living in my depression and my anxiety and my fears and all of this. And it's what I go to. And what happens is this old smelly blanket becomes a place where I'm safe when I'm paralyzed by what life has to offer me. Our 4th step in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous gives me a pathway to heal from the old emotional baggage that I got to Alcoholics Anonymous with. And the wonderful thing about it is I no longer have the hole in the soul, and I no longer live in pain of the past. And while, yes, step 4 is about resentment in part. The first 3 columns are about the resentment. All of the work done past column 3 is all about me, all about my truth, all about the things in life that I need to heal from, my behaviors, my patterns, and all of this. So we are going to run you through a slideshow of our 4-step workshop. If you happen, we'll mention it later, but I'll let you get prepared for it now. If you have a pencil and a piece of paper, you can write down the slide number. Down at the bottom right-hand corner will be a number on each slide. And at the end, we'll open up and we can go back to any slides that you want more discussion or elaboration on that will be helpful to understanding all of this. So, we generally take about an hour and a half to do this. So it is a workshop, not quite a normal meeting, and we'll be happy to take questions about absolutely anything when we're done. So please enjoy it. And Trish, you are on. My partner in all of this, I would say ladies and gentlemen, but since you're all ladies, my partner Trish.
Hi everybody, I'm Trish and I'm an alcoholic. And welcome to the Lppbbsg Primary Purpose Big Book Study 4th Step Workshop. And we also have some resources from the workshop and past recordings of this workshop on our website, Lppbbsgaa.org. And these recordings are in audio only, no pictures, nothing, just sound, mostly Jamie and I talking and maybe a little bit of the questions afterwards. And that's also on our YouTube channel, and both of those addresses are listed in the chat as well.
Let's open this up with the set-aside prayer, please. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, the 12 steps, the big book, the meetings, my disease. But most especially, God, please set aside everything I think I know about you, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please let me see the truth.
And our preamble, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Before I move on to the slide, I just want to mention real quick, whether you have done a 4-step before, need to do a 4-step again, or if you're someone who happens to sponsor somebody who needs to do a 4-step, all of this is very resourceful information in order to help all parties through that process. So moving on to this slide, please keep in mind that this is a workshop. We will be discussing some real life examples of what could be difficult things for some. While questions are encouraged, for clarification, we do not expect specific discussion to encroach on topics that should be saved for your sponsor or for a one-on-one conversation. Please feel free to take notes as we go along. This workshop should not be used as a platform for sharing your 5th step.
That has happened in here.
Boy, has it.
So please use your notebook to write down the slide number from the lower right-hand corner of the slide. If you have any questions, and that way we can take all questions at the end, but we'll have the slide number to refer back to for clarification and further understanding.
So, but before we jump right into step 4, we always like to take and lead into it a little bit with just a bit about our program and the first 3 steps. So, our circle and triangle. And we always hear everybody say unity, service, and recovery, but the way the triangle is laid out, recovery is the foundation of everything. So the bottom leg of the triangle is the foundation that holds the other 2 legs together. And recovery is the mind, found in the big book from pages XXV to page 164, is a set of 12 spiritual principles that are the 12 steps. Have you continued to actively take the 12-step process outlined in the AA Big Book? And then unity, the body, found in the fellowship, set of 12 spiritual principles found in the 12 traditions. Do you have a group that you are committed to? Is your group committed to the 12 steps? And does the group live by the 12 traditions? And then service and spirit, found in carrying the message, a set of 12 spiritual principles found in the 12 concepts. This applies to from the group level through the service structure all the way to GSO. Are you working with others and taking them through the 12 steps? By the way, ladies, you can feel free to hold your camera up, take screenshots of any of this if you need to. Forgot to mention that, or if you're on a computer and you can screenshot it, by all means, please feel free to do so. And if you need more time to do that, just hold your hand up like that real quick so we can take a pause for it.
Or unmute and say, wait, go back. And while this is a 4th step workshop, it's always a good practice to review the foundation of steps 1, 2, and 3 before beginning. Therefore, we will be reviewing some hotspots to be sure the foundation is intact leading into step 4.
Through the information we read in the doctor's opinion, along with the first 44 pages, we are given the information we need to self-diagnose our alcoholism. Only 51 pages in all lead us to this decision. This is our step 1.
And step 1 from page 30 in our book, Alcoholics Anonymous. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed.
Bam! Smash it. Get out that hammer. And from page 60, we take a look at the ABCs in a little bit of a different light than the way we normally hear them. Being convinced. A, am I convinced that I am alcoholic and that my life is unmanageable? Step 1. B, am I convinced that no human power could have relieved my alcoholism? Still step 1. And C, am I convinced that there is a power greater than my own power that can and will relieve my problem? A and B, step 2.
And referring back to We Agnostics in our book on page 1551, and this chapter is a pathway to letting go of old ideas and old beliefs and opening my heart and mind to finding new beliefs. And from the book, this happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them.
And a life based upon self-will from pages 60 through 62. And we read this in the first person. You know, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, they told me to find myself in this book. And while it is written in the we, meaning the first 100 who gave us this program, I read it in the first person to actually make myself become part of this book. So, starting on page 60, If my arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, I may be sometimes quite virtuous. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, I am more likely to have varied traits.
What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right. I decide to exert myself more. I become, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit me. Admitting I may be somewhat at fault, I am sure that other people are more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is my basic trouble? Am I not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Am I not a victim of the delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things I want? And do not my actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Am I not, even in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony?
And still from page 61 and 62. I am self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. I am like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining about the sad state of the nation. I am like the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. I am like politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. I am like the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him. I am like the alcoholic who has lost all and locked up. Whatever my protestations, am I not mostly concerned with myself, my resentments, or my self-pity? Selfishness and self-centeredness, that I think is the root of my troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt me, seemingly without provocation. But I invariably find that at some point in the past I have made decisions based on self, which later placed me in a position to be hurt.
So my troubles, I think, are basically of my own making. They arise out of myself, and I am an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I usually don't think so. Above everything, I must be rid of this selfishness. I must, or it kills me. God makes that possible. And there often seems to be no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. I have had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but I could not live up to them even though I would have liked to. Neither could I reduce my self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on my own power. I had to have God's help. This is the how and why of it. First of all, I had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, I decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be my director. He is the principal, I am his agent. He is the father, and I am his child. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which I will pass to freedom.
Now that the book has given us the ideas that our problem is based in self, we need a pathway forward to finding out what our selfishness and self-centered fears and delusions are. This comes from the process of the 4-step inventory. The first 3 columns are centered around the resentments and how they affected us. Everything after that looks at our own thoughts, actions, and patterns. This is a discovery process of who we have become.
So, how? First of all, I have to quit playing God. And why? It didn't work.
Boy, howdy, it didn't work. Before I go into the third step prayer, I want to propose this idea. All of the stuff that we just read from page 60 to 62, the selfishness, the self-centeredness, the writer, the actor, the director, could those all be the foundational things that I am asking God to relieve me of in this prayer? The other thing about the third step prayer is we notice that there will be no amen at the beginning or at the end of it. The third step prayer starts a cycle of 5 steps, steps 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we will get to the amen finishing in step 7 with the beginning of this prayer. It will be the completion of it. So our third step prayer: God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Hang on just a second, Trish, before you move on. I believe that it is no mistake that when we close our big books and we open our big books, that this prayer on page 63 is directly across from all of the selfishness, self-centeredness, fear, and delusion on page 62. I don't think it's by any mistake when you close your book that those 2 pages kiss each other.
So, from page 62, the 3 aspects of a relationship with God. The director and the actor. The director runs the show. The actor listens for direction. On my own, have I failed to provide what I need to be okay? And am I ready to make the decision that hereafter God will direct my life? Principal and agent. An agent represents who the principal or employer would have them be. Have I failed to be the person I would have me be? And have I failed to make others who I need them to be? Am I ready to make the decision that hereafter I will represent who God would have me be? And father-child. A child trusts their father can provide what they are incapable of doing on their own. Have I failed in directing my life on my own power? Am I ready to make the decision that hereafter I will trust that God will provide what I need?
And you know, folks, there's a lot of workbooks out there, but pencil and pad are the best workbook on the planet. There are many 4-step workbooks available. However, the 4-step was never meant to be a check-the-box inventory. The instructions in the big book always say, referring to our list, which we have written in detail, you know, there are some inventory books and stuff out there in Hazelton puts one out that comes to mind, and a few others. And one of them has 144 questions on why I'm powerless, just on step 1. So we can run down a whole lot of rabbit holes and make it very difficult. This really, truly is a simple process.
Before I begin, I will pray something like this so I can make sure I'm inviting God into the process. God, please help me see the truth about the things in myself which have been blocking me from you.
And when we go into page 65, and as we all know on page 65 there's 3 columns, but we're going to give you the example of 2 right now. And we are generally as definite as this example. First 2 columns, work each column from top to bottom. List all of the names, then list all of the causes. Why is that? Because if we do it across instead of down, what happens is we get to that first or second resentment, we start working the columns across and we go, oh, no way, that hurts too much. I am not dealing with that. So this gives us a process to get all the names listed and then get all the causes listed before we start moving into the other things. So, for example, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. Mrs. Jones, my employer, and my wife. The cause: his attention to my wife. Told my wife of my mistress. Brown may get my job at the office, so I'm going to give you this quick example. Yeah, I'm resentful at Brown, but right there, that they're listing three separate individual resentments, not just one. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. And she's a gossip. There again, three individual resentments. My employer, unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. Again, multiple resentments. And my wife misunderstands and nags me, and hey, she likes Brown too, and wants the house put in her name.
So after we've looked at those first two columns, working both from top to bottom, then I'm going to add that third column. And again, going to be working from top to bottom. And the third column is going to be the 7 areas of self, which begin on page 64. And those are self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. So Mr. Brown, we've read what his causes are, what his resentments are. What does this affect? This affects my sex relations, and this affects my self-esteem. And in those little brackets, in those parentheses, we add the word fear. Because, self-esteem, fear, they're tied up really closely together. Mrs. Jones, we have the 3 resentments there. This affects my personal relationships, my self-esteem, and there's that word fear again. My employer, we've already looked at what the resentments are. What does this affect? This affects my self-esteem, my fear, and my security. And my wife. And those resentments affect my pride, my personal sex relations, and my security. And there's that word fear again. Fear is a big thing in my inventory.
Hold that slide for a second, Trish. Folks, a lot of times when people do this work, they just take those things and they say, oh yeah, it's fear. Oh yeah, it's self-esteem. And that's all they ever put. But they never go into any detailed aspect of why it's fear, or why it's self-esteem, or why it's pride and security. And that's what we want to present to you in this. How to get to those whys. All 3 of those columns are lies.
But those are my feelings.
But I keep telling you, feelings aren't facts.
Oh. Feelings aren't facts, but they are valid. And we need to find out where they come from and then decide what we're going to do with them.
There are people who will look at the chart on page 65 and say, this is the 4th step. However, there is more work to do. The full directions start on page 65 and end on page 71. Page 72 states, we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and discovered the obstacles in our path. Causes and conditions from page 64. Without these other columns, I am missing most of the discovery process. The following slides will show the rest of the process.
And I was one of those folks who looked at that picture on page 65 and said, that's it, that's all I got to do. So you can bet it wasn't very thorough when I got into the rest of the columns a few years later and realized there is a whole lot of stuff there that I had missed. So, from our book on page 66 and 67, before each 4th column, consider in paragraph form, how have I done the things I've resented in column 2 to the person I listed in column 1 and or others? And that comes from page 66, paragraph 4. In other words, You did this to me. How often did I turn around and do the same thing back to you or to somebody else? And then it says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick, like ourselves. And after considering this realization, we say the fourth step prayer from page 67. This is a sick person like myself. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done.
That's turning on my get even machine. Don't you have something else to say about the seeds that are planted there, Trish?
Well, I wasn't sure which one of us was going to do that tonight.
You are tonight.
Oh, okay. So if I'm asking God to save me from being angry, if I want to be helpful, I'm not willing to be helpful to someone if I'm angry at them. So by asking God to save me from being angry, that's opening the door for me to be helpful to someone. And it's also opening the door for me to consider forgiving them for what they've done, whether they've come to ask for forgiveness or not. Because if I'm holding on to that resentment and I'm angry at them, I am not going to want to be very helpful to them. So by letting go of that anger, it plants the seed of starting to forgive them. And without that forgiveness, I don't want to be helpful to them.
So, this is what it should look like on your notepad. Probably in your own handwriting. And these are going to be examples. So, and, you know, one of the things... I've worked with many sponsees and they're like, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't have to try and figure it out. It's already been figured out for me. All I have to do is follow the pathway. So again, I need to ask God and continue to ask God. So at the top of every page, we always put, God, please let me see the truth about who I am resentful at. So, this is what the first column from page 65 should look like when completed. These are the individual resentments. Notice there are multiple resentments per person. Again, Mr. Brown, three resentments. Mrs. Jones, 2 resentments. My employer, 2 resentments.
And there were 3 for my wife, but they didn't fit on this page. Otherwise, it would have been too small to read. So we've also come up with our own worksheets that look very similar to that page, to the yellow page on the left. And if you're interested in getting a copy, just put your email in the chat and I can email them out to you. And what you'll get is the example, the yellow page, but then you'll also get the blank side, the right page, the white side. But the yellow page will also be in white. That way when you print it off, it doesn't kill your printer ink on your first page. And you can print off as many pages as you need, and this way it gives you a little bit of a head start. The columns are there for you to start writing. The prayer is at the top for you to say. Sometimes I write over it, and it just gives you a little head start into the format of what these columns should look like. So if you'd like a copy of our workbook, please just put a copy, your email in the chat to me or to Jamie, and we will get it out to you.
The 7 areas of self, and here again, most of them are listed on page 64. The third column refers to the 7 areas of self. These are found on pages 64, 65 in the big book. Our focus will be on self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. I ask myself, how do my resentments affect me in these areas of my life? Keep in mind, sex relations have nothing to do with the act of sex here. Rather, the focus is on male-female relationships in today's world, same partner relationships, or relationships with another partner of our choice. While pride is not listed on these pages, it is included in the 7 deadly sins, which is discussed in the 12 and 12 in step 4 on page 48. It also ties very closely with self-esteem and gives me a different perspective on looking at myself. The 7 deadly sins are pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth.
So we are now looking at that third column. And we're looking at the 7 areas of self, which are listed in the upper left-hand corner: the self-esteem, the pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and our pocketbook. And what we're going to do here, rather than write everything in column form, because for me, if I try to squeeze it into a column, once I'm done, once I run out of room, I say, I'm done writing, I don't have to do anymore. So we put it, one person, one resentment. So if you remember going back to the form, Mr. Brown, I had 3 resentments against him. So in the upper right-hand corner, it says, Mr. Brown, first resentment. So I'm going to have 3 different pages for Mr. Brown, 1 for each resentment. And what that does is it helps detangle all of the resentments from each other. Because if I'm looking at a big bowl of spaghetti in front of me, or I'm a crafter, a big ball of yarn in front of me, it's a whole lot easier to untangle and eat that spaghetti or to crochet that blanket if all that yarn is untangled rather than trying to work. So I got to untangle it first. So I look at each resentment individually, and then after they're untangled, then I can look at each one by one. So 1 page per resentment, not 1 page per person. And this is an example of column 3 done using the 7 areas of self and how it should look when it's completed. So at the top of every page we write, or if you're using our worksheet and it's already there, we pray or write over it, God, please let me see the truth. And then I'm working on my resentment inventory, and these are my instructions using the 7 areas of self. And this is the effects mind. And I keep columns 1 and 2 in mind while I'm writing the 3rd column. And that comes from page 65, paragraph 3, where it says, we consider it carefully. And I want to look at the 3rd column and consider each sentence I write down, but also the opposite of each sentence, so that I can reveal my fears behind each of the 7 areas of self. And you'll notice the right-hand side, there's a column just to list down the fears, and we'll get to what we're going to do with them a little bit later. So for self-esteem, that's defined by how do I see myself, or how do I feel about myself? What's the role I have assigned myself with this person? Sentences may start with I am. For example, I'm the best husband she could have. Or I'm the worst breadwinner there is. And what are the fears, or what may be the fears that are related to this? I'm not good enough. She's not happy with me. Somebody's going to come in and steal my wife. Pride. This is how I think others see or feel about me, or the role that I have assigned myself in other people's lives. And your sentences may start with others should or others should not. For example, others should not pay so much attention to my wife. And the fears there are the fear of being alone and the fear of abandonment. And it also gives me a note there. Consider the opposite of how I see myself, and that's what the pride is.
And it's worth a quick mention now, and we'll mention it again later too. When we email out the worksheets, we send these sample pages as well for instruction purposes, so you don't have to get lost and confused. There's 13 sample pages, and you can print as many pages as you need for doing this work. So, moving on, this is an example again of the 3rd column using the 7 areas of self and how it should look when completed. And we considered the opposite of how I see myself in the fears column. So, ambitions. What do I want to happen here? Sentences start with I want. For example, I want a healthy, happy relationship. Or maybe it's I want to be left alone, damn it. And what are the fears associated with that? Being alone, Losing everything might be one of them. Security. What do I need here to be okay? Sentences start with, I need blank to be okay. Example, I need my wife to love and respect me. I need Brown to respect my marriage. Identify the fear, being disrespected maybe, being unlovable. Personal relationships, my deep-seated beliefs of how this relationship is supposed to look. Wives, trust their husbands. Friends should respect me, my marriage, my family. Identify those fears, maybe not being accepted or not being respected. Sex relations, my deep-seated beliefs of how real men or real women are supposed to be. Sentences start with a real man or woman blank. Example, real men don't pursue other men's wives. What's a fear associated with that? Possibly abandonment. Pocketbook, affects my finances. Sentences start with no one should or shouldn't. Example, others should not go into my wallet without my permission. No one should go into my phone without my permission. Brown should not ask my wife out to dinner and then ask her to pay for that. What's the fear there? Maybe financial insecurity. I want to touch on a couple of these real quick. And where do most of us get our initial introduction into how relationships should work? Isn't it generally from mom and dad? And we see how they act in adult relationships, or grandma and grandpa. And sometimes we might come from a loving home that is like Beaver Cleaver's house, but in most circumstances it's not. So many of us have grown up with chaos and a lot of fighting and a lot of dysfunction in our homes. So we go as little children and we carry this stuff into our lives. One of the reasons that we put wallets and cell phones on here as an example of pocketbook and affecting our finances. How many of us keep our credit cards and debit cards in our wallets? Have we ever had money stolen out of our wallets or taken money ourselves in order to feed our disease? I don't know any alcoholic that hasn't done something. I was known to rob somebody else's piggy bank. Is something I'm not proud of, and boy, those were hard amends to make. The reason for cell phones today is I might not be doing anything wrong. You might be going to see who I'm texting, but I also do a lot of banking and pay my bills online through my phone today. So if somebody gets their hand on my phone and goes to my Venmo account and all of a sudden Venmos themselves $500 out of my account into their account, that is certainly going to affect my financial security. So, in today's world, it's kind of a big deal.
So again, a copy of the worksheet on the left in the yellow, and a copy of the blank form, both of which would be included in the email, with all filled in as the example, blank for you to fill in yourself, and without the yellow background to save your ink. And the fourth column, this is where I discover my defects of character or my shortcomings. And the directions are found on page 67, paragraph 2 in the big book. And again, we're going to use 1 page per individual. I'm going to resolutely look for the harms that I have done to others. And I'm going to list where I am to blame. This will be the foundation for my 8th step list. And the form may need to be modified to use for institutions. And I continue to recognize my own fears. And the direction for a fear inventory is going to be found on a later screen. Or a later slide.
So, again, continuing with the fourth column worksheet, and this is an example of what all of my patterns and behaviors have been. This is who I've become through all the other causes and conditions in my life. This is an example of what the fourth column should look like when completed. This can be done in phrases, does not have to be full sentences. No need to write your full story. And I'm going to use this example of this. How many times do we call a friend on the phone and tell them the same story over and over again 975,000 times because we want to be sure that they get it? We have excellent memories, most of us do. So we can just use key hotspot words that will remind us of what the story is for when we sit down with our sponsor to do this work, or whoever is to hear this work. So, the realization of how I have done the things I resented in column 2 to the person I've listed in column 1 and or others. In other words, this is where I turned on my get even machine. And this is how I was busy getting even. Self-seeking. Look around the whole resentment. What did I do? Where was I to blame? My selfish actions and activities were what? Who did I affect? Who else did I pull into this drama? I placed blame. I acted out. I called your boss to tattle. I said I was going out with my friends, but instead I was going to get laid. Selfishness. What was my selfish thinking when I was doing the above self-seeking actions? My selfish attitudes were, I demanded to get my own way. I was filing for divorce papers in my mind while we were in bed. I had it all planned out. You were going to pay, and I cut you off. We use so many things as a weapon in our relationships, don't we?
Where had I been dishonest? What were the lies I was telling myself that resulted in my selfish thinking, which then led to the self-seeking behavior? See how these all kind of build on each other? And where was I in delusion? I could find somebody better. You would never be good enough. You didn't care about me or our family. And where was I afraid? What are the fears that drive the delusions above? What are the fears that drive the lies, that drive the bad thinking, that drive the behaviors? I was afraid. Why? I was afraid I would be alone, even though I didn't want you. The children wouldn't have their other parent. I wouldn't be able to pay the bills and we would be homeless. I feared for my safety, and I may have also feared for retaliation. So the above fear drives the dishonesty that result in the selfish attitudes or thinking behind the self-seeking actions and behaviors.
And continuing, and here again, another example of our fourth column worksheet, how it should look when it's completed. Consider if there are any other fears that should be on the fear list. Consider the opposite of each fear if it applies and add it to the list. Don't just look for the negative, look for the positive as well. For example, I fear being alone or meeting another abusive partner. I fear being homeless. I fear having to move back in with my parents. I fear losing my job for the lies I told when I was out. I fear my truth. I fear being successful. I fear having too many friends. And harms. Do I see the harm that I caused? Look around the resentment. Parents, friends, employers, innocent bystanders, friends I complained to who had nothing to do with the situation. I have harmed my spouse and my children with my lies. I have harmed my boss by not showing up for work. I have harmed my relationship with other family members. I have harmed my credit and financial status due to my selfish actions. I have harmed friendships by complaining about my spouse to them. Always auditioning for the Jerry Springer Show.
Now, how many times did I have an argument with my husband, and the first thing I did would be call up one of my friends and say, "Do you know what he did?" And it wasn't just to let go of the anger, but because I wanted them to take sides. Because some of these people I called were friends with both of us. And if I'm trying to get somebody to take sides, me against him, that's involving an innocent bystander who had nothing to do with the situation. But it could harm the friendship or the relationship that they have with me or with my husband. So the fear inventory. First, we're going to read the big book from page 67, the third paragraph, starting with notice the word fear, to page 68, the third paragraph, where it says outgrow fear. Then I'm going to list all the fears. I'm going to make a graph of columns, rows and columns, and all those fears that I've identified so far in my inventory, I'm going to list in that first row, going straight down. We're just going to focus on the first column right now, and then we'll look at each row. So take all the fears that you found or discovered while you were working your inventory and make a single list. List each fear only once in that first column, even though as you were identifying them, it may have come up several times. And then look, why do I have this fear? Look around each fear. And the next slide will show how to follow the trail of fears, as we call it, by looking at the fears hidden behind each fear. And that comes from page 68, where it says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. And wasn't this because self-reliance failed us?
And here's an example of the trail of underlying fears. And I love these examples. And it shows how there's always a hidden fear under the fear that I think I'm experiencing. I fear not being good enough. If I'm not good enough, I fear I'll be unwanted. I fear being unwanted. And if I'm unwanted, I fear being alone. I fear being alone because I fear the emotional pain of being alone. I fear sitting in the emotional pain, and if I sit in the pain long enough, I fear I'll drink again. I fear drinking. For me to drink is to die. I fear dying because I fear the unknown. I don't know what dying means. I fear the unknown because I fear there is no God. I fear there is no God, so I repeatedly trust self-reliance, even though self-reliance fails me. But wasn't I trying to kill myself anyway? Is this alcoholic insanity? Is this how I should think the drink through? Am I setting myself up for a drink when I'm drowning in fear? Trish, would you spotlight my screen for a second, please? So, oftentimes we just say, oh, it's fear, but we never define what fears are. So this trail of fear helps us do this. But what we do with fear is we throw it out there like a blanket, and it's like a blanket of fog, and we throw it over here, and we throw it over here, and we wrap ourselves up in it, and we end up becoming paralyzed in depression and fear, and we are unable to move along and work through those fears. So that's what this trail of fears is all about, is to help us find those underlying fears so that we can heal and no longer be prisoner to those fears. And you can unpin me, or I'll do it. There you go.
So this is what our template will actually look like, just rows and columns. And on the top of the very column, it will say, I fear being. And not good enough was one of the first fears that we discovered way back as we were working on that column 3. And what's that fear behind? The fear of not being good enough is the fear that I'm going to be unwanted. What's the fear behind being unwanted is I'm going to be alone, and I don't want to be alone. I'm afraid of being alone. What's the fear behind that? The emotional pain. The emotional pain of being by myself, being alone, not having anybody there. And what's the fear behind that emotional pain? Is the fear that I'm going to drink again. And what's the fear behind drinking again? That I'm going to die. And I don't know what's going to happen then. I don't know what that means. And that brings me to the fear of the unknown. And if it's the fear of the unknown, that probably means I fear there is no God. And if I fear there is no God, I can't possibly be God reliant. So I'm living in that self-reliance. And I know that self-reliance is going to kill me. And it's going to fail me. It's your favorite slide.
It is. Hey, let's talk about sex. The sex inventory and sex ideal from our big book, pages 68 and 69. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It is so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cries out that sex is the lust of our lower nature, a basic necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices that cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should have we done instead? We got all this down on paper and looked at it, and that series of questions is so important.
And the following are the directions for the sex inventory in question form. Imagine that, taken right out of the book. And we always ask God, just like on all the other pages, to show us what we need to see before getting started. And this comes from pages 68 and 69. So we're going to read the big book from pages 68, the 4th paragraph, where it starts out, now about sex, where Jamie just read. We're going to read a little bit further. We're reading to page 70, the 2nd paragraph, where it ends saying would bring heartache. Then pray. And I'm going to make a list of all the relationships in my life. And then determine what can be done. I'm going to write a brief history of each relationship, including the motives for getting involved, the specific sex conduct, major points in the relationship, and how the relationship ended or how it is now.
And again, from pages 68 and 69, and these were the questions at the bottom of 2 slides ago. I review my conduct and look at each relationship, answering the following questions. 1. Where had I been selfish? 2. Where had I been dishonest? 3. Where had I been inconsiderate? 4. Whom did I hurt, including those who were brought into our drama, including the innocent bystanders? 5. Did I arouse jealousy? 6. Did I arouse suspicion? 7. Did I arouse bitterness? 8. Where was I at fault? And 9. What should I have done instead? The answer to the last question is never, I shouldn't have gotten involved because I can't change the past. I did get involved, and this has now become the experience of my life. Refer instead to what I should have done or how I should have behaved in the relationship. Make sure you are especially complete with this answer, since it will be used later when writing my sex ideal.
And writing my sex ideal from pages 69 to 70. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideas and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, never to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice.
Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. The reading continues through the end of the chapter on page 71, encouraging us to review our work and then move forward towards amends. This also encourages us to continue to align ourselves with God so that He can remove whatever self-will has blocked us off from Him.
The following slides are a real working example of a fourth-step inventory. It follows the first person in column 1, all the way from first resentment through all 4 columns, discovery along the trail of fears, and ending with the sex inventory and sex ideal. This takes us through the entire inventory process, starting on page 65 to the end of page 71, and complete step 4 on this one resentment. And the reason we did this was, rather than looking at some fictitious character in the book of Mr. Jones, we're looking at more of a real life, this could have been me example that some people seem to be able to relate a little bit more to.
Born out of experience. So again, at the top of the page, let me see the truth about who I am resentful at. It's a real life working example. This is column 1 and column 2 from the big book. And in this particular case, the resentment was Dad, the cause. He abandoned our family and left us with nothing and nowhere to go. That the first 2 columns can be that simple. Use the following pages to continue with 1 page per resentment. So again, multiple resentments would be multiple pages.
So at the top of every page, I'm going to write or say or trace over, God, please let me see the truth. And it's on the papers that we can send to you as a reminder. Invite God into the process. And we're looking at the 3rd column in the 7 areas of self: self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook, from page 64. I am resentful at my father. I am resentful at him because he abandoned our family and left us with nothing and nowhere to go. This affects my self-esteem. I'm not good enough for him to stick around. He loved my brother more. And the fears: not being good enough, being alone, and the fear of abandonment. And this affects my pride. No father should be angry or violent to a 3-year-old. Fathers shouldn't leave their sons. And the fears there: anger, fear of violence, being unlovable, and again, the fear of abandonment.
And again, while some of these things we're talking about may be uncomfortable, they are the reality for the alcoholic. Many of us grew up in storybook homes, but there's a good portion of us that didn't and grew up with tragedy in our homes. We're not trying to trigger any old negative thoughts or emotions, but that stuff has kept us tied for so many years and prisoners, and this is just a way to be free of it. Continuing on in the 7 areas of self, this affects my ambition. What's the ambition? I want my dad back. I want to be loved by my dad. I want my dad to be a role model, and the fear associated with that is abandonment, not having a role model, not having a strong father presence in my life. Moving on to security. What do I need to feel secure? I need to feel safe to be okay. I need to feel loved to be okay. I need to have shelter and food to be okay. The fear associated with that are something like homelessness, being hungry, being hurt, being alone, emotional pain, or being unlovable. Moving on to personal relationships. Real men don't leave their families. Real men support their families. The fear associated with that. Being alone, not knowing how to treat others. Sex relations. Real men don't bring strange people into their homes to have sex with their families and then leave to have sex someplace else. The fear there associated with that is abandonment, sexual abuse, molestation, not being safe, fear of not knowing what a healthy relationship is. And pocketbook. Others should not threaten my home, food, utilities, finances, etc. The fear associated with that is fear of homelessness, abandonment, going hungry, not being able to pay the bills. You know, some of us have had to do instant mashed potatoes and Kraft macaroni and cheese for meals 3 times a day because it's all that we could afford. Some of us have had even less, and some of us have had much more. We just find what relates to our particular situation.
And now I'm moving into the 4th column, and I'm looking at me. And I'm discovering my patterns, my defects of character, and my shortcomings. And again, at the top of every page, write and pray, God, please let me see the truth. And the realization, did I repeat or develop the same behaviors that I resented in column 2 to the person I listed in column 1 or others? And that comes from page 66. Where had I been self-seeking? I acted out to get my own way. I put unreasonable demands on my father, mother, and other family members. I knew emotional drama would always get me attention. I blamed you for my problems. Where had I been selfish? I didn't care what others had to sacrifice just to please me. I constantly demanded attention. When I didn't get the attention, I accused others of not loving me. Where had I been dishonest? I would always tell lies. I would steal things. If I got in trouble, I would blame others. I had been so dishonest for so long that I couldn't see what the real truth was. The biggest tragedy I see now is I was lying to me.
Where had I been afraid? I was afraid of being caught in my lies. I was afraid that I wouldn't be loved because of my lies. I was afraid I would always be alone and not wanted by anyone. The above fears drive the delusions that result in the attitudes behind the action. Consider if there are any other fears that should be on the list. Consider the opposite of each fear if it applies and add it to the list. And for example, I have a fear of abandonment or fear of staying in a toxic relationship, fear of being alone or filling my life with too many people, fear of being invisible to others, or staying in a bad relationship, or fear of not being financially stable on my own.
And now we come back to the trail of fears. And the first thing we're going to do is list all those fears that we've recognized in that first column, top to bottom. I fear being not good enough. I fear being alone. I fear abandonment or being abandoned. I fear anger. I fear violence towards me. I fear going hungry. I fear being unlovable, not having a role model, being homeless, and the list goes on. But we're just going to look at this one page. Once I have that list or that column going up and down, top to bottom, and I only list each fear one time, then I start working across. So the fear of not being good enough. Why do I have this fear? Because if I'm not good enough, I fear you're not going to want me. I'm going to be unwanted. Why do I have that fear? Because if you don't want me, I'm going to be alone. I'm going to be by myself. And I don't like being by myself. So the fear of being alone. Why do I have that fear? Because of all the emotional pain that brings. When I'm sitting by myself, my brain starts running and I just have that emotional pain that just grows and grows and grows. And I fear that emotional pain because once it starts, I sit in it. And I fear sitting. What's the fear behind sitting in that emotional pain? The only way I think it's going to shut it off is if I drink again. And why do I have the fear of drinking? Because it's going to lead me either to death or insanity, and I don't like either one of those options. And why do I have that fear? Because of the fear of the unknown. I don't know what either one's going to bring me. And why do I have the fear of the unknown? Because I fear there's no God. And if I fear there's no God, I'm living in that self-reliance. So I've taken that fear about as far as I can go. I don't really see that there's anything else that I can do that. So I'm going to come down one line. And the first thing I look at is being alone is the next fear. But if I look in that top row, I've already taken the fear of being alone all the way to the end. So those red X's just tell me, stop, I've done this one already, because it's in that first row. So then I come down to row 3, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being abandoned. The fear of being abandoned, what's behind that is the fear of being alone. And there it is. 3 times I have already found in my life, in my fears, the fear of being alone. And if that's coming up 3 times and I've only looked at 3 of the big fears, it tells me that's one of the main fears that I have in my life. And it's also something to bring to my sponsor as we're talking later in my 5th step about my patterns. Coming down one more row, the fear of anger. Why do I fear anger? Because it's an unpredictable emotion. And why do I fear that unpredictability? Because I don't know what I'm capable of. And if I don't know what I'm capable of, I'm living in that emotional pain. And there that is again from the top row. So those red X's come again to tell me, stop, I've done this one already. Next row down, the violence towards me. Why do I fear that? Because I don't like being hurt. What's the fear of being hurt? The fear of the emotional pain. So now I've looked at 5 different fears, and I've come up with 3 of them, or 2 of them that keep repeating. Emotional pain has come up 3 times, and being alone has come up 3 times. So there's some patterns here that I need to look at of what are my main fears. And then following each fear from beginning as far as I can take it, and then realizing that most of my fears are all based in self-reliance, and then I'm not relying on God, I'm not trusting God, and I'm trying to make a go of it on my own. And once I can get out of that self-reliance, because self-reliance fails me, once I can get back to trusting God, those fears have a tendency to disappear.
And our sex inventory, this is a real working example of a sex inventory from an actual real resentment. This inventory is based on a list made on the history of relationships from page 69. This is not necessarily based on the resentment list. This is an inventory of our own conduct in relationships. And again, at the top of the page, God, please let me see the truth about my conduct in relationships. And we have the name and the relationship, and we write a brief history of the relationship. For example, my motives for getting involved were: he or she sure was cute, he or she sure was friendly, he or she sucked me in with that smile and made me melt. My specific conduct in the relationship has been, my specific conduct was totally self-seeking, so I could feel better about myself. Others commented on how cute my boyfriend or girlfriend was.
The major points that came up in the relationship are: I don't play well with others. I always want my own way. Always sexually motivated. I want control in every situation, whether it's sexual or not. I would do whatever it took to keep you from leaving me. We would fight over spending time with my family at holidays. Religion and politics would always lead to more fighting and sometimes to more beatings. How it ended, or how it is now. I walked away in anger because you didn't do what I wanted. Or I acted out in a way that you would leave. That way I wasn't the bad one for leaving. But this relationship on both of our parts was so sick and toxic that leaving was a means of survival. And just as a thought, after the process of taking the steps and making amends, some of these relationships have healed and have become healthy friendships. But the important part is that we've taken a look at and taken responsibility for our own part.
I can say that to be the truth because I have a friendship that is like that from over 40 years ago. And continuing with the sex inventory worksheet, look at each relationship and answer the 9 questions, reference page 69. Where had I been selfish, considered only myself? I wanted sex all the time, or I never wanted sex. I was demanding. When I didn't want sex, I pushed you away or rejected you. I demanded unhealthy or unreasonable sex. Where had I been dishonest, deceptive, or fraudulent? I said you were the only one, but you weren't. I said I was going to work early, but I stopped by to see my girlfriend first. 3rd question. Where had I been inconsiderate, my disregard for others? I did not consider your feelings. I did not consider your plans when I decided to stay late at work and went to see my girlfriend.
Whom did I hurt? And look around the whole relationship. I hurt my spouse. I hurt our children. I hurt my girlfriend or boyfriend's children. I hurt extended family members. I hurt relationships at work when they caught me in my lies. How did I arouse jealousy? I openly flirted with others in front of my wife or my husband. I flirted with my friends' spouses in front of them. How did I arouse suspicions? Or how did I make you doubt my honesty? I lied about where I was going to be and when I would be home. I would constantly take phone calls and texts when I was home, and I wouldn't tell you who they were. I would take a call from I would call you from his house with his parrots squawking in the background, and I couldn't figure out how you knew I was there. True story. How did I arouse bitterness, deep resentment? I left our family gatherings to see his family instead. I paid his rent and neglected our family. I lashed out in anger, always defensive. But he needs me. And where was I at fault? I put my family second to his family and their needs.
What should I have done instead? Do not write, not gotten involved in the first place. What should my behavior have been? Make sure that you are especially explicit about number 9. We will refer back to this list when writing the sex ideal. Reference page 69. I should have put my family first. Should have been honorable and faithful. Should have financially and emotionally supported my family. I should have been kind and loving and tolerant. I should have taken care of others' needs before mine. I should have prayed and asked God for God's help. Harms. Write any specific harm that comes while you are writing. The realization that I caused deep emotional wounds in my family that may never be repaired. Many of the things I did could be considered abusive or narcissistic. In my experience, I have caused unknown and sometimes irreversible damage to others' lives. And a prayer. God, I ask you to help me mold the ideal relationship, what the ideal relationship should be in my life, that I may be able to live by that ideal and live in a healthy relationship with others. Amen.
And now that we've followed the instructions and taken a look at ourselves and our conduct, let us now turn to page 69, paragraphs 3 and 4, and refer to the instructions in finding our own sexual ideal. In this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want.
There are 12 steps and 12 traditions for recovery. There are 11 chapters in our book. Is it possible that the chapter 12 in your big book will be your story? So how will it read? Finding yourself through this inventory could be the beginning of your chapter 12. It is now up to you to write your chapter 12.
And a 5th step note. The bottom of page 74 to the top of page 75 gives us the directions of how to choose who is to hear our 5th step. Its suggestion is that we choose someone that will keep our confidentiality. This could be a priest, minister, or rabbi, or a counselor, people who are bound by confidentiality by law. However, experience has taught us of the value of taking this step with another alcoholic, sponsorship. We believe that the advantage to this is that the experience of another alcoholic knows where to direct us next through the process of recovery. We recommend that you prayerfully ask God to bring the right person into your life to help through this process.
We hope that you will continue to join us in our bi-monthly workshop. as this work is only a beginning into the truth about ourselves. It is our experience that when people return month after month with new questions, we all grow in effectiveness and understanding. We continue to ask God to mold us into the people He would have us be so that we can help others find their truth. Yours in love and service, Lppbbsg. And that is our 4-step workshop, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Are there any questions, comments? Is there anything that we can go back and answer to be helpful?